shootings and stabbings and severe domestic violence cases that the medical team went in and performed what I would view as being miracles to keep these people alive. But when he did follow up with them a few months later, he found that while their physical injuries had healed, many of them, their lives had fallen apart. They had lost jobs. They were having family problems. There were issues around irritability. People were cycling into homelessness. There was a whole host of things. And that really resonated with me because at that time, I was consulting on some of the medical units, and I could see firsthand what was happening to people. But what were we doing at that time? And to this day, I think it continues to happen that, and we'll talk, this isn't just a hospital-based program, but for right now, I'm talking about people who have had a violent injury that are in the hospital. The best that we had to offer at the time was to recognize that these folks were going to probably end up having problems related to their trauma. And the best we could do was to give them, a brochure or a business card to community mental health, and then keep our fingers crossed that somehow they may make their way into services. And yet, when we looked at that, we ended up finding out, when we did a 6-month follow-up, that out of 100 people, 111 people that we saw, consecutive victims of violent crime, and every single person was referred to mental health. When we did a 6-month follow-up, not one person made it into community mental health treatment, and yet they all, at 6 months follow-up, were having fairly severe symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So I know you're all familiar with post-traumatic stress, but just as a review, what are we talking about here? So I just dropped all of my notes, so I'm going to disappear for a moment and collect my pieces of paper. Okay, so what we know is the psychological problems of PTSD may include flashbacks of the traumatic event, nightmares, insomnia, intrusive memories, feelings of depression, anger, fearfulness. People may become socially isolative. They may develop phobias. They may be afraid to leave their homes. They may have difficulty concentrating. They may become distractible. They may have difficulty following through on things. There may be an increase in alcohol and substance abuse. And really what we're talking about here is people really have a difficult time functioning on a day-to-day basis as much as they may try. We know that violence robs people of their sense of safety in the world. Violence disrupts people's lives and their relationships. It damages the spirit. In essence, lives get turned upside down. Lives begin to unravel. But it's not just happening to individual victim. It has a ripple effect. It has a ripple effect to families and ultimately into the community in which they live. I'm going to talk about a woman that we saw at the San Francisco TRC, and I'm going to show you a few slides about the presentation, and then as we go along, what ended up happening. But when you hear about this woman, and you try to put yourself in the position of this woman, think about what you would need in order to get over what has happened to her. So Vanessa is a 50-year-old African-American woman. She's a mother of 4, a grandmother of 6. She works full-time as a security guard and a part-time hairstylist. And in San Francisco, there's a drive-by shooting. Her 31-year-old daughter, Vanessa's 31-year-old daughter was at a gas station. She had a van filled with her brother and some of her children. Vanessa was pumping gas. There was a drive-by shooting. Vanessa was killed. Her 18-year-old, Vanessa's 18-year-old son and 3-year-old grandson were seriously injured. Additionally, Vanessa's son-in-law had died 6 months earlier. So Vanessa is now needing to quit her job to care for her expanded family of 3 and her 6 grandchildren. She's now out of work. She's grieving. She has a very ill 3-year-old grandson and a very ill 18-year-old who suffered multiple gunshot wounds. So just think about that, and we'll get back to it. What can we offer Vanessa? And I'm going to tell you what typically happens and basically argue the point that we can do better than what typically happens. We can do better than usual care. But before I do that, just a few statistics here. You know, we know that in 2016, there was, it's hard for me to see the slides from here, but there was about 5.7 million violent crimes in the United States. We also know that most victims of violent crime do not file police reports for many reasons. People may be afraid of the police. They may be afraid of retaliation. And we also know, and this is amazing, only 1 in 10 victims received victim services after their victimization. Only 1 in 10. And yet we know when someone is a victim of a violent crime, we would expect about 50% of them to go on to develop either post-traumatic stress disorder or some sort of severe depression or other types of anxiety disorders. We also know that victimization often attacks certain communities more than others. The most harmed are the least helped. We know that people in households earning less than $25,000 a year are most oftenly victimized. We know that there's a link to poverty. We know that there's a link to issues around social inequality. We also know that only 20% of crime victims are aware of victim restitution funds. Only 4% of victims' needs were addressed by the current victim services. And by the way, this is from the National Institute of Justice. And we also know that ethnic and racial minorities had the highest amount of unmet needs. This is difficult for me to see, but we do know that African American and Latinos are more likely to have been victims of 3 or more crimes in the past year. And so let me just mention, we'll talk about this in a second. So most states, including New Jersey, has the Victim Restitution Fund. The Victim Restitution Fund is they take penalties and fines, and they put them into this Victim Restitution Fund. And the Victim Restitution Fund is kind of like an insurance policy for victims of violent crime. So you can apply if you were a victim to this pot of money, and you can get reimbursed for things like funeral and burial expenses. You can get reimbursed for medical expenses, and you can also get reimbursed for mental health services. But it's a good idea, and it's a well-meaning fund, but many vict have trouble accessing that fund. And one of the key points behind it is that it requires that someone file a police report. And we know from the statistics, less than half of victims file a police report. So if you don't file a police report, you can't get access to that fund. The other thing is, there are many steps that someone needs to take. You need to, in California, and it may be different in New Jersey, but in California, you need to have file a police report. You need to be able to send in proof of loss of wages. You need to do all of these different things, which, think about Vanessa. Is she in any shape to put these materials together? Is she in any shape to try to find her tax returns, to be able to send that in, or to prove that she has lost wages? Now, Vanessa did file a police report, But even with Vanessa, and this was a crime that was all over the newspapers in San Francisco, high-profile crime. Even with someone like Vanessa, you apply, you are deemed eligible. It may take, in California, it may take about 3 to 6 months for the state to determine that you're an eligible victim. And then you determine to be eligible, and then you try to hand in your bills to be paid, and it may take an additional 3 to 6 months to get reimbursed for those things. In the meantime, no survivor of a violent crime should have to wait 3 months, 6 months, 9 months to get the services that they need. Vanessa should not have to wait that long. And then you get those services, and we'll talk about what those services are in a minute. But the other thing is a lot of crime victims, they don't have, even if they don't have the money, even if the state says, we'll pay you back, they don't have the money to go for mental health treatment. They don't have the money to pay co-payments for their medication. So again, there's this big lag time in what we expect from our victims. So for Vanessa, she's having full-blown flashbacks, nightmares, insomnia. She's having panic attacks. She's having fainting spells. She's having fear of driving her car. And by the way, 2 things happened with the car. Number 1, she's having fear of driving the car, given the trigger that it was at a gas station. Her daughter is murdered. The other thing that ended up happening is, so Vanessa's daughter had a large SUV because she had 6 kids, and the SUV was confiscated by the police as evidence. And so Vanessa now has this small little car, and she's trying to figure out how she's going to drive her 3 children and her 6 grandchildren around. It's affected her health. She's having an increase in high blood pressure, a worsening of her diabetes. She's afraid to have her children and grandchildren leave the house. So CPS is threatening to get involved. The kids aren't going to school. What does Vanessa do? She's also dealing with overwhelming grief, but she's needing to be strong for her family as her children and her grandchildren grieve. She has suicidal ideation, but she has a commitment to live for her children and grandchildren. So for those of you that are interested in the, we're talking a lot about the emotional impact, but this has an economic impact on the communities that we live in. We know that untreated trauma results in a greater likelihood in high-risk behavior. We know it increases smoking, alcohol, substance use, poor eating, and exercise habits. We know that victims of violence end up accessing health care 2 to 2.5 times more frequently than those without a history of violence. We know that the cost to the health care system is anywhere from $333 billion to $750 billion annually. And so there is an economic cost to not treating trauma, and it actually ends up being cost-effective if we provide timely services. So what do a lot of crime victims have access to? And for here, we could use the example of the Victim Restitution Fund. If someone is able to be eligible for that fund, they are able to see a mental health professional. But typically, the traditional mental health model is office-based, no home visits, no practical assistance or coordination with other services, tends to be a 50-minute hour, tends to be feeling, insight, and disclosure-oriented. But what does Vanessa need? She can't leave her house. She's agoraphobic. She's worried about her kids. And she certainly needs a lot more than mental health services. She needs access to a lot of practical assistance and practical help. And I will also say this. There is a great stigma around receiving mental health services. And there is a good reason for that. Traditional mental health services have oftentimes not been very welcoming to our clients. Traditional mental health services often don't acknowledge that there are social inequities. Traditional mental health services often don't recognize and see that racism can also be a part of what makes symptoms worse for people. And then I'm a psychologist, and we get surprised when people don't want to see us. We get surprised when people don't want to see us. And so what we're talking about here is trying to make mental health services not more accessible that people can get to us, but when they're with us, how we treat them. And we'll be talking more about that. So our vision is a community that heals the wounds of violence and embraces hope for a nonviolent, compassionate world. Clearly, we're not there yet, but that's a vision we're working toward. So it's a model that emphasizes assertive outreach, engaging victims into services. We provide clinical case management to address all basic needs: medical, legal, financial, housing, legal. We provide evidence-based psychotherapy to target the symptoms of psychiatric distress. We integrate mental health, medical, social services, and actually legal services, and we coordinate care across complex systems. So again, think about Vanessa and think about that whole laundry list of things she needs. And is she, as an individual in the condition she's in, is she able to navigate all of those different things herself? So the barriers, what we've talked about here, is many survivors feel ashamed about entering therapy. We've already talked about there's a stigma around mental health services. And this is the other thing. One of the hallmarks of post-traumatic stress disorder is avoidance. And yet, if you avoid talking about your symptoms, you're not going to get better. So we have to figure out a way to work with people who have avoidant symptoms. You know, sometimes people say, when they hear about this model and the kind of outreach we do, which I'll be telling you about, you know, why do you have to do so much outreach? If these people needed the help, they would show up. It's not that easy. You know, I think people miss the point about, number one, the stigma of mental health treatment, and secondly, that avoidance can be incredibly powerful. And thirdly, there continues to be quite a bit of distrust around whether or not treatment will help. But you know the other thing, and if there's one thing that I would hope that we can do with the clients we serve, is to give them a little bit of hope. To give them a little bit of hope that their lives can be different. So many of the people we see, I will kind of jump ahead and tell you that at the Trauma Recovery Center we see recent victims of violent crime. But when we have asked them, thinking back over your life, have you ever had any other victimization happen? And we find that the average person we see have, on average, 6 previous histories of significant trauma in their lives. We're talking about cumulative trauma. There's nothing in this group about post-traumatic stress. It is ongoing stress. And for many people, they really do lose hope that anything could be different in their lives. It's kind of like, why bother? Nothing's going to help. I'm not going to go to treatment. I'm not going to go see this person because nothing's going to help. And it's the one thing that I think we can do, whatever system of care you're working in, is to be the holders of hope for our clients. And you hold on to that hope. And at some point, you can transfer that hope to them so they can believe themselves that their lives can be different. So what we do is we do Engagement, tracking, assertive outreach. We work with survivors on what is important to them until trust and rapport are built. We'll see survivors at the hospital, at their home, or elsewhere in the community. So when we first started out, the main place we were seeing clients were, we developed a system at the hospital. So whenever there was a victim of violent crime admitted to the hospital, we would go to their bedside, and we would talk with them, and we would try to, okay, so I'm going to admit, this was one of the big mistakes we made. So I figured, okay, giving them a brochure to community mental health doesn't work, so I will go, and I will say to them, you know, tell you what, I have these great mental health services, and when you get out of the hospital, come and see me. Did that work? It did not work at all. It didn't matter if I had a wonderful banquet to give people of mental health services. People weren't buying it. And when you think about it, that's not quite what they needed. When they were leaving the hospital, they needed help with safe housing. They needed, if they were going to be talking to the police, maybe accompanying them to talk to the police. They needed help with financial entitlements. They needed, think about Vanessa, all of the things she needed. Mental health services was kind of, at that point, maybe a little bit lower on the list. So what we began doing was telling people, tell you what, if you don't want to talk about what happened, that's okay, but we can offer you some practical assistance. And from that, quite frankly, a foot in the door, a lot of times, and to this day, most of the people we first engage say they don't want mental health treatment, but after working with us around practical assistance, and they begin to trust us, they begin to say, yeah, maybe I'll check that out. So what we did at first was, after I learned the first lesson, we began offering practical assistance, but we also said to them, recognizing that many of them might have physical mobilities when they left the hospital, so they couldn't come to me. Many of them were afraid to leave their home, so we would say, if you don't want to come to us, we'll go to you. So we began doing home visits. We began doing outreach. In the beginning days, with the client's permission, we took a picture of them, and we got tracking information. This was particularly for like our homeless people. You know, how do you do follow-up if somebody's homeless? But we would say to them, if it's okay with you, if you don't show up, we're going to come and look for you, if that's okay. And where do you hang out? You know, which homeless encampment do you stay in? Where do you go to cash your GA check? Which liquor store do you use? And we would literally go and we would look for them. Now, okay, I have to say in the beginning, this seemed a little bit like we were stalking our clients. But I will tell you, when we would show up and we would find someone, they were amazed. It was like you went out of your way to find us. We've since given up that assertive aspect of it. It ended up just not being very cost effective. But we do a lot of assertive outreach. We still do ask people, if you don't show up, can we come to your home? What is safe for you? We never want to go to somebody's home if they're in a domestic violence situation, but how can we get a hold of you so that we can make sure you're getting the help you need? So the goals are to streamline the process for victims to access services, to develop a comprehensive, well-coordinated model of care that includes coordination across mental health, physical health, psychosocial services, legal advocacy, and to do it in a way that increases their access to provide these services using a cultural humility lens, and I should add also a social justice lens. These services need to be equitable. I really do believe there's a health disparity issues with people of color and people living in violent communities and people living in poverty. People do not have access to equitable services, and that is also something we try to work with. And we also try to do it in a way that is both treatment effective and cost effective. And I'm going to be showing you some pictures. These are our clients were very gracious and generous in allowing us to show their pictures publicly. These are the faces of violence. And we had one of our outreach workers that would go around and do outreach to clients. And this was a gentleman who was in our emergency department after having been stabbed. This is the hand of one of our social workers, Stacy. The man is living in a van on the streets of San Francisco, and she's doing outreach to him and trying to figure out what kind of services he needs. This was somebody, San Francisco has a huge homeless rate. If you've been to San Francisco lately, there are many, many homeless encampments around the city, and many of the homeless folks are victims of violent crime. So the intensive case management includes helping them apply for benefits, helping them with financial entitlements like GA, Medicaid, SSI, SDI, arranging for stable, safe housing, linking them to a medical care for follow-up, accompanying them to appointments, doing a liaison with community agencies, working with the district attorney's office and the police department, doing court accompaniment, linkage with the religious community, and assistance to work. And I think linkage to the religious community, I think, is an important thing because I will tell you again about Vanessa. This was someone who was very linked to her church. And like a lot of survivors, when her daughter was murdered, she lost her sense of faith. Why would God do something like this? She also did not want to go back to church because the last time she was in church, her daughter's coffin was in church. But every time she thought about going back to church, she'd have these flashbacks about seeing her daughter in a coffin. So, again, we don't force religious services on anyone, but sometimes at some point we're there if they're wanting to reconnect with their religious community. So these are some of our outcomes. We're wanting increased access, decreased psychological and medical problems, increased functional abilities, the ability to work, parent, do daily activities. We want to minimize long-term disability. We want to improve quality of life. We want to increase cooperation with law enforcement if the victim would like to. And we want to increase access to entitlements. And we want to have people be satisfied with what we provide. So what ended up happening with Vanessa? We were able to do home visits. We were able to provide her with mental health services. And particularly in the beginning, we were able, with dealing with her panic attacks, teaching her grounding mechanisms so she was able to leave the house. We were able to help her return her children and grandchildren to school. We were able to work with CPS around this. And that was really a very important linkage for CPS to understand the reasons why the kids weren't going to school and able to work around that. We were able to get her child care assistance so she could leave the home occasionally, assistance with meals, particularly in the beginning when she was dealing with the acute aftermath. We helped her with file a victim comp application. We helped her file for state disability. We were able to obtain Medicaid for the family. We were able to reconnect her back to primary care. We got her into safer housing. We were able to provide advocacy with the police department. And so going back to the car that was impounded. So one of the things about the TRC model, let me just ask you this. What do you think it takes? What does it take to heal from something like this? Yes? Connection is so important. And so when you have something like this happen, your whole worldview changes. If we are lucky and if we are blessed in our lives, we can wake up every morning and we can think, the world is a safe place, the world is a good place. You have something like this happen, your worldview changes. The world is filled with cruelty and violence. The world is not a safe place. Your worldview changes. So, in order to help with that, we have to counterbalance it. And we have to develop healing communities. And the healing community cannot be restricted to the four walls of the Trauma Recovery Center, but rather the Trauma Recovery Center picks up a whole lot of people that are going to help along the way. So in this case, we sent word out to people and said, we need donations. This grandmother needs an SUV. And we were able to get a car dealership in San Francisco to donate a car for her. One small example, but when we're able to say to our TRC clients, it's not just us that are supporting you. We have a whole lot of partners that are here to help you. And you know what? Not only does it send a powerful message to our clients about the healing community, but this business owner, it actually gave him great joy to feel that he was making a difference. So just as violence has a ripple effect in our community, kindness does too. So the philosophy here is to counterbalance the worldview that the world is cruel and violent with, the world is also filled with good people. And that is a basic message. So kind of pushing the walls of your health center or your community agency so that people see that. And I know a lot of you are probably already doing that. I'm not saying anything new. But for me, I think it's something that I think we need to make explicit. As a result, 1 year later, she had a decrease in flashbacks, nightmares, improved sleep, no panic attacks. She was able to leave her house, drive her car. She was managing her medical problems better. We were able to find safe housing outside of San Francisco in a neighborhood where she had a big backyard, safe neighborhood, the kids could walk to school. She returned to work as a hairstylist. And as she left treatment, she said, I went to TRC crying out for help, and their doors were open. They helped me find the strength to go on. Really, it was all about her, though, right? When you think about it, it takes so much courage to walk through the doors of a mental health agency. It takes a lot of courage, and yes, we helped facilitate it, but it really, the amount of strength this woman had was just like phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. I would have been brought to my knees. I was telling E earlier this morning, you know, I had something happen in my life a few years ago, some family medical issues, and a lot was going on at once. And I was sitting there with a whole to-do list of things that needed to be done. And all of a sudden, I stopped and I realized, here I am. I work in the healthcare system. It's easy for me to talk to all of the doctors that are involved in here. It's easy for me to navigate everything that needs to happen. I have a good support system. I have a loving family. I live in a safe neighborhood. I'm financially fine. And I am being brought down to my knees with the kind of things that I'm handling right now. And I literally was. I mean, I was going down for the count. And I had to really stop and think, my God, if that's what it's taking for me to be brought down to my knees. What about the people we're serving who do not have a privileged life like I do? And at that time, I was thinking, I wish I had TRC to help me with this. This is one of our training psychology interns doing a home visit. So who provides these services? We're a multidisciplinary team of social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, nurse practitioners. We have a research evaluation team. We have social work interns. We have multi-language capacity in English, Spanish, Portuguese, Vietnamese, Japanese, Hindi, Russian, and a bunch of other languages. And so we provide crisis debriefing, crisis intervention, individual trauma-focused therapy. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Psychoeducation support, medication management, and family work. We offer a lot of groups, a domestic violence group, a self-care group, a mothers of homicide group. We'll talk about the therapy in a little bit. We do a lot of skills training. And one of the things that ends up happening, at some point, people can reach a point where, and this is usually later on in their recovery phase, where they begin trying to make sense of this, trying to make meaning from something bad that has happened. And this is where the resiliency comes in. It's like people who've been through horrible things can get to the point where they're trying to make sense of it, and in making sense of it, they oftentimes want to give back. And they oftentimes want to try to help other survivors, or they want to give back to their community. And we talk about this as making meaning of the trauma. And one of the things that has developed out of that is something we call CHAT, Communities Healing and Transforming Trauma. And this evolved kind of in a not very planful way, but it's our Speakers Bureau. And it's made up of our survivors who at some point in their recovery are wanting to give back. And we actually have training on public speaking. And the Speakers Bureau meets monthly, and they support each other. And they go around and they talk to the police department, or they go into high schools and they talk about violence. They go to the law school at UC Berkeley to talk to future lawyers. They talk to anyone who would like to hear them. And this is, and it's pretty amazing the work they do. And the other interesting thing about it is it also forms a support group for them as well, because they're able monthly to meet with people and get the support around this. This was a young mom who, when she was pregnant with her baby, was a victim of, cumulative domestic violence. But in this case, her partner, as you could see, slashed her face. You see the scar on her face, and also did other physical damage to her as well. We got involved while she was in the hospital, able to get her to leave the situation she was in. She gave birth to a very healthy baby boy. So wanted to tell you about what I've learned the hard way is, okay, I'm from San Francisco, so I know I'm not from San Francisco, Staten Island. But, so, California has the reputation of being very touchy-feely and all of that. But I will tell you, it's not just about the positive vignettes. It's about proving this works. And if you can't prove nowadays that what you're doing works, it's hard to get funding. And so from early on, we began collecting data to see if it was effective. And quite frankly, I really felt that if we do something and it doesn't work, let's not subject our clients to it. Let's not continue to do the same thing if it doesn't work. Had data So we had data about the Rape Treatment Center in San Francisco. And when we started the Trauma Recovery Center, the Rape Treatment Center came under us. So we had data before the before TRC and after. And before the Rape Treatment Center for sexual assaults in San Francisco, although all sexual assaults were offered mental health treatment, only 6% showed up for mental health treatment. And after instituting the Trauma Recovery Center model with all of the outreach and case management and practical assistance, it went up to 71%. Now, this is interesting. We do not coerce people into filing police reports at all. But what we do find, with our assistance, people are more likely to file police reports. And that's because we're willing to go with them. We're willing, if they're wanting to do that. And so from both the point of view of it can be seen as a client empowerment, that they can actually speak to law enforcement. It can also be seen as kind of a public safety issue, that the police are then more aware of the sexual assaults that are going on. But we were able to demonstrate that it went up to only 42% of sexual assaults filing a police report. It went up to 71%. And so one of the partners in the Trauma Recovery Center model is our work with the police department and the district attorney's office. And so we do work with them around doing more trauma-informed policing, and how are they going to be interviewing victims. You know, we at times will sit with the victim when they're filing a police report, and we will try to make sure that they're being treated in a respectful way. And so we've had a lot of growth in that area as well. So what we know is that with our extensive outreach, only a small number of victims file a victim compensation application. We know that disadvantaged and young victims are less likely to file. We know only a small number of victims receive mental health services. So we did a randomized treatment trial. This was in the early days, where we approached people, and with their permission, we randomized 2/3 of the people into the Trauma Recovery Center and 1/3 into usual care, which was, here's a brochure to community mental health. And we found that those that were assigned to the Trauma Recovery Center, that we were able to help 77% of them file an application, where without, under usual care, only 28%. It's a busy slide. This is just saying that TRC helped to eliminate disparities related to low level of education. Homeless people were much more likely to engage in our services, and younger victims were more likely to file victim comp than usual care. And so when we just simply referred people to community mental health, only 38% got there, and with those that received the assertive outreach, it went up to 72%. People are satisfied with what we're doing. Can't quite read it, but it says 93% said treatment helped them feel better emotionally. Well, you could read that. So good client satisfaction. 99% reported that they were moderately to extremely satisfied, and 97% reported that they would recommend the center to their family and friends. Okay, I'm going to talk here about, I'm just going to show you pretty quickly. We measure people's symptoms at baseline, not for research purposes, although we can use it for research, but really, we want to know what we're dealing with. How severe are the person's symptoms? How severe are their nightmares, their insomnia, their flashbacks, whatever? And so, oops. Okay, so you see there's a dotted line there, and that dotted line means that the person meets criteria for full-blown PTSD. And what this is showing is that at intake, when we first see the person, pretty much their PTSD scores are way over the threshold for PTSD. These people have full-blown PTSD. And after, by session 16, the symptoms decreased by 38%, and now the majority of people are no longer meeting criteria for PTSD. Same thing for depression, that line in the middle. So oftentimes people have both depression, have both PTSD and depression. They coexist together, and that dotted line shows probable diagnosis of full-blown major depression, and you can see that by session 16, the symptoms decreased by 52%. Okay, sleep. Sleep is a really big issue for people who are victimized. And when I don't get a good night's sleep, I am worthless the next day. I mean, I really can't think very well. I'm somebody who needs sleep. And if you think about someone who's going day after day after day not sleeping, they're going to be irritable. They're not going to be able to do things efficiently. So sleep disturbance is a really big thing that we treat, and we're able to show that a decrease of 20% in sleep disturbance. Same thing with physical pain, same thing. I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly. Just to make, it's kind of a messy slide, but under usual care, treatment is 100% office-based, right? Under TRC, you're providing all of these mental health services, but you're also able to provide other things. You're providing evaluation and quality assurance. You're doing additional outreach and tracking. You're doing program planning. You're doing consultation to other providers. You're going out into the community, and you're helping other folks become more trauma-informed. And we're also in the position of having interns who end up helping us see more people. And it also helps us to be able to train the future trauma specialists of tomorrow. Whoops, something just went wrong with. Do we have a tech person here? It moved forward.
Oh. It'll take a while.
Okay. Does anyone know anything about? Go forward.
There you go.
Oh, okay.
Should be able to hit that arrow.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah, so there.
Perfect. Okay. So we're on the home stretch with the outcomes, and then we'll talk more specifically about the model. But summary, so we increased the rate of sexual assault, receiving mental health follow-up. Actually, this is just a summary. I can just go on. Okay, so I'm not going to go through this whole thing other than to mention that the more we got into this with our clients and the more on a day-to-day basis we were witnessing how bad the system of care was in California, and that it was inefficient, it was burdensome, the more we began to realize that that we needed to do something about it. And for me, and I want to be really clear here, for me, this TRC model, it was never an end in and of itself. For me, it's not about the model, but rather it's using the model as a vehicle to really change things and to try to figure out how we can change systems of care. And so it doesn't have to be the TRC model, but whatever you do, if you're really invested in working with survivors of crime, we really can do better. We really can do better. So long story short, we ended up having a lot of data that showed, oops, somehow I think we lost, there was a cost effect, oh, I don't have it. Well, in any event, we were also able to show that our model of care was 35% less costly than usual care. So not only was it, oh, yeah, there it is, TRC services was significantly more cost-effective, and it was about 33 to 35% less costly than usual care. So the combination of improving clinical effectiveness as well as cost effectiveness. So we were eventually able, over time, with the data we had, to get the state legislature passed a bill which adopted our model as the model of care for victim services in California. And lots of legislation. Let's see. Okay, so they revised the government code to direct the California Victim Compensation Program to administer and award grants to develop trauma recovery centers in California. And then, thanks to the work of a lot of people, particularly the Alliance for Safety and Justice, a ballot was passed called Prop 47, Safe Neighborhood in Schools. And under this initiative, the law was changed so that sentencing for low-level nonviolent crimes were made from felonies to misdemeanors. And there was a savings from reduced prison and jail sentences, and 65% of that savings were directed to mental health and drug treatment diversion programs, 25% to community violence prevention and support programs, and 10% of this money was to fund trauma recovery centers throughout California. And then a few years ago, another law was passed that creates standards for TRCs across California, codifies minimum requirements and best practices for what constitutes a TRC. So right now, we have 14 TRCs in California, 8 in Ohio, 2 in Illinois, 1 in Iowa, and hopefully we will be having more in, let's see, I might even have hopefully we're working with Georgia, Florida, New York, and Western Australia, if you could believe that, and maybe New Jersey. So there's a handout in the back, which is the core elements of the TRC model. And I'm just going to go through, we've talked a lot about this. And as a matter of fact, if somebody could get me one of those handouts, because I can't quite see the slide. Oh, thank you. Perfect. So the first core element, and this is what the state of California has adopted, provide outreach services to crime victims who typically are unable to access traditional services, but not limited to victims who are homeless, chronically mentally ill, members of immigrant and refugee groups, disabled, those who have severe trauma-related symptoms or complex psychological issues, or of diverse ethnicity or origin, or juvenile victims, including minors who have had contact with juvenile dependency or justice system. We serve victims of all types. So we don't silo victims, and what I mean by that, we really do see victims of all types of violent crime. And there's some advantages to that, because if we're talking about people who are poly victims, the woman who comes through the front door and says, I was sexually assaulted, they may also have a history of domestic violence. They may also have a history of some other kind of physical assault. So again, there is something about treating all of the victims. We do have, there are some differences clearly between different crime types, but all of our staff really get trained to talk to reach out and to treat people who have the different crime types. Let's see. We, as we already mentioned, offer evidence-based and evidence-informed mental health services that include individual, group treatment, medication management, substance abuse treatment, case management, assertive outreach. This care needs to be provided in a manner that increases access to services, removes barriers to care, and may include providing services to the victim in their home, in the community, or at other locations that are conducive to maintaining quality treatment and confidentiality. Multidisciplinary team, again, this is a mental health model, so it does include a team of at least one psychologist, one social worker, and additional staff. Clinicians are not required to work full-time as a member of the multidisciplinary team. We do have a psychiatrist that's available to the team with medication management. Clinician needs to be either a licensed clinician or a supervised clinician engaged in completion of the applicable licensing process, et cetera. And the important thing is, in this model, we recognize that staff doing this work, and it is very difficult work, are going to be prone to vicarious trauma, and we need to make sure we keep our staff healthy. If we don't keep our staff healthy, they're not going to be able to help people. So we provide clinical supervision, and we do a number of other things around vicarious trauma. Coordinated care, we offer mental health services and case management that are coordinated through a single point of contact with support from an integrated team. Each client receiving mental health services have a treatment plan in place, which is reviewed by the entire team. And here what we're talking about is, if you have a team of people working with this client, the team really works together as a team and really coordinates things. So sometimes the client may have some kind of service across town. We coordinate. Let's say it's with the district attorney's office. We are the ones that help coordinate things for the client, rather than the client going from all the various locations to get their treatment needs met. The deliver services include assertive, I think we went through most of these. Let's see. We ensure that no person is excluded from services solely on the basis of emotional or behavioral issues, including but not limited to substance abuse problems, low initial motivation, or high levels of anxiety. So in traditional mental health, we would say, they're not motivated for treatment, and we wouldn't see them. We need to ask ourselves, why aren't they motivated for treatment? And we need to try to figure that out. And, we use motivational interviewing. We recognize that what may appear to be low motivation, something else is going on under the surface. We use trauma-informed evidence-based practices. And I have another slide on that. We're goal-driven. Our goals are to decrease psychosocial distress, minimize long-term disability. We provide services for up to 16 sessions for those with ongoing problems and a primary focus on trauma. We extend treatment beyond that, and up to 32 sessions, and even beyond that if needed. And we wrote into the state law that no person is excluded from services based on immigration status. So why are we using evidence-based practices? Evidence-based practices are developed through research and implementation. They are interventions that have been shown to work, and they are consistent with scientific evidence showing that the intervention can improve client outcomes. These are some of the typical therapies that we use at TRC: cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, harm reduction, skills training, and affective and interpersonal regulation, also known as STARE. Seeking safety. So these are a whole list that we are offering. By the way, I wanted to mention, everything I've talked about today, we have a manual, and it is online on our website. You can download it. It's about 200 pages, and it goes through every aspect that I've talked about today, and it's a free download on that. And it's also about maintaining spirit, inspiration, and hope. And I love this quote: Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. And I was referring to communities healing and transforming trauma, and this is from, we have a chat manual around developing a speakers bureau, and I alluded to how this developed earlier. So a while back, after we'd been up and running for a while, we had a new governor in California, Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's known as the Terminator. And yes, he went there and he terminated our funding. And this was heartbreaking. We were maybe 5 years into the TRC, and right before the former governor, Gray Davis, had put us into the permanent state budget. And then he was recalled, and the Terminator was elected, and one of the first things he did was to terminate our program. And we were like, just devastated. And the city and county of San Francisco was considering picking up some of our funding. And a lot of our clients heard that our doors were going to close. And they approached me and they said, how can we help? Maybe we can go talk to the mayor. Maybe we can go talk to the board of supervisors. And I didn't want that to happen. I felt like I didn't want to exploit our clients. I didn't want to parade them before a bunch of politicians. It just didn't feel right. But they persisted, and they said, we want to do this. And so there was a bunch of public hearings that were going on, and not just about our program, but about other programs. And this hardy group of TRC survivors stood in line from 3 p.m. in the afternoon till 10 o'clock at night at City Hall, where there was this whole panel, people from the mayor's office, and 10 people from the Board of Supervisors who were going to make budget decisions. And one by one, they stepped up to the podium, and they spoke truth to power. And I will tell you, there were people on the Board of Supervisors literally tearing up. The audience, everyone there is advocating for their own funding. People, there's like thunderous applaud for these survivors. We leave the room, it's exhausting, we're leaving City Hall, and the mayor's finance person kind of runs after me. This is, by this time, it's like 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and she says, okay, like, how much, what will you settle for? How much can we give you? And it's like, we're not settling for anything. We want the $1.1 million restored. And it was like, done. So that taught me an important lesson. Number one, I say I listen to my clients, but I wasn't going to listen to them because I thought I knew what was best for them. I don't want to traumatize you. I don't want to exploit you. But they were really clear to me. Let us empower us to do this. So from that, chat was formed. Oh, by the way, so I mentioned there were 4 states that now have trauma recovery centers. We have now formed the National Alliance of TRCs. And so the 4 states, we get together on a monthly basis on monthly phone calls around how to improve what it is we're doing. This is a picture that was taken at the state capitol in Sacramento when it represents a number of people from California, Ohio, and Illinois, where we decided we were going to do this national movement. So if New Jersey ever has TRCs, you can become part of our National Alliance of TRCs. So I told you I was going to talk a lot. So I'm done, other than, and I'm going to give this to you really, email me, call me. I may not be able to get back to you right away, but I will get back to you, or one of my staff will get back to you. Probably best is to email me. I'm in greater contact with email than I am with phone calls. But now it's time to open it up to questions. Yes, please.
Have you published this in any peer-reviewed journals yet?
Yeah, so the question was, has this appeared in any peer-reviewed journals? We have probably about 10 publications, and it includes a lot of the data that I presented up here. Yes?
So I'm out there in the New Jersey Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Yes.
You might have said this, but I'm
Yes.
so just, what is the point of entry?
Oh, that is, no, I didn't say it. Thank you. That's a great question. What is the point of entry? So the point of entry is, it's vast. We receive referrals from San Francisco General, as I mentioned. As a matter of fact, we now have a system where every day we get a printout of every victim of violent crime that has been admitted to the hospital. So we get a lot from the hospital. We get a lot from our local domestic violence shelters, from a rape crisis center, from the district attorney's office, from victim services. We have about 10 publicly run, government-run primary care clinics. We get it from them. So it's pretty widespread. We really value partnerships with other people doing this work. And so, over time, we really work, so we work closely with shelters. We work closely. San Francisco General also has a violence intervention program, the wraparound program. We work closely with them. We actually have one of our social workers embedded within that program. This is a group that does a lot of work, peer counseling, and a lot of work with victims of gang violence. And so we do a lot of work with them as well. And then you had a question. Yes. I'm sorry, the homeless population? The question is, why do I think the homeless population is receptive to treatment? I think it has to do with how open we are to folks. I think it has to do with the way we engage people, and I think it has to do with and we're not successful with every homeless person, but I think it really does have to do with, we use a lot of a harm reduction model. A lot of our folks have substance abuse problems. We do a lot around that. I think it really has to do with, again, eradicating some of the stigma around mental health treatment and really meeting people where they are. Yes. I'm sorry.
16 sessions is that seems very remarkable, according to the statistics.
Yes.
That's remarkable recovery. What do those sessions consist of?
Yes. So the question is, 16 sessions, you were very polite about it, but really the other way is, how could you possibly do anything in 16 sessions, given the enormity of the problems we're facing? First of all, why did we come up with 16 sessions? First of all, we're using evidence-based treatment that has been really focused on trauma symptoms, and a lot of those, a lot of those approaches really show that if you really focused on that and are doing it, a lot of the evidence-based therapy interventions are kind of a manualized approach, so depending on what you're using, each session is pretty, you teach people skills like how do you deal with panic, how do you deal with nightmares, so very skill-based, not your usual talking therapy. We're really teaching people skills around if they are having anger issues or irritability, how to manage that, how are they managing getting flooded with flashbacks. So each of the approaches we're using, this kind of a manualized approach, combined with case management. Now let me say, when a lot of times people get better in 16 weeks, if they don't get better, that doesn't mean we kick them out of treatment. Excuse me. It does mean, as we're approaching 16 weeks, if they need an extension, the clinician talks to the team about it, and the case will usually get extended to 32 sessions. If they go beyond 32 sessions, then we as a team put our heads together to figure out, what do we need to do differently? Let's not continue to do the same thing, and we will extend treatment over that. I will tell you, excuse me, The people who tend to need more than 32 sessions tend to be family members of homicide. Excuse me. This is New Jersey air I'm not used to. With Vanessa, you know, we probably saw her for more than 50 sessions. This is not someone we're going to serve properly in 16 sessions. There is another advantage of starting out with a time-limited model. Quite frankly, it keeps us as clinicians targeted and focused. So we have 16 sessions. We need to really prioritize what we're working on so that we really ensure the client's getting better. The other thing, San Francisco TRC, we receive about 800, we treat about 800 unduplicated clients a year. If we had a long-term treatment model, we'd probably only be able to see like 100 people a year. What happens to the remaining 700? So if you don't use a somewhat time-limited approach, it means that a certain group of people are going to get treated for 3, 4, 5 years, and you kind of forget about the people who are coming up behind them. Akila.
Yes, I met you, Dr. B, years ago, the fabulous group, chat group, with Kathy, who's no longer with us, Laura, and we became one of those advocates for the work that this great work that she was doing in the city. We've been so blessed, to have TRCs throughout the state of California, and now across the country. As a survivor, my oldest son was murdered home from winter break from college. I grew up in watching the Georgetown housing projects where we've had long-term conflict with law enforcement for various reasons, that is very public. But, one of the most important aspects of our work is we provide a lot of victim services in Watts and now through the Newark Community Street Team in Newark. That relationship between community and law enforcement has been so fried, it's hard to get police reports. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of being a self-identified victim? Because one of the challenges that one of the barriers to receiving services was that you couldn't get a police report, therefore, in the traditional model, services aren't being provided.
Excuse me. I think that's a really good point. First of all, it's one of the main reasons that we developed the TRC in recognizing that a lot of people don't file police reports, and in every single state, that's the entryway you get to getting victim restitution funds. And so here, we do not require a police report at all, and that we will see anyone regardless of filing a police report. I think each community is a little bit was more amenable to taking suggestions around how they were interfacing with crime victims. And I know that's not true in every single community, in which case you have a bigger problem on your hand. But the reality of it is maybe people, but if they don't want to file a police report, they don't have to. And I think that is a really, really very important part of this model. And because of that, I think we're really seeing entire communities that otherwise have been really have been forbidden to receive services through victim restitution. Was that what you were trying to get at?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, how about you? Yeah.
I have some nuts and bolts.
Yes, please.
You said 1.1 million is what you got, and I was wondering what kind of center or services that actually funded, such as what is the geographical radius
Mhm.
served, and the population?
Yes.
of the community?
That's a great question. So what is the geographic region we serve? What is the population of the people we serve? Now, again, we have 25 TRCs to look at right now. In San Francisco,
Talking about for the 1.1.
yeah, for the 1.1, we're pretty much, that was back then. One of the things about the TRC model is that you're able, once people see that it works, you're able to really expand your funding. But even back then, we were receiving anyone who lives in San Francisco. But San Francisco is a pretty small, it's not a very large city, population of about 800,000. So we were seeing anyone, the eligibility criteria, you must be a San Francisco resident, you must be a victim of a violent crime within the last 3 years. And each TRC is a little bit different. The reason why we did that was that we recognized early on there were so many recent victims of crime that we were not going to have enough slots for somebody who might have been victimized 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And then the other criteria was they can't already be enrolled in any service that's duplicating what we're doing, so they can't already be enrolled in mental health services. Yes?
How many clients would you see annually out of just the San Francisco?
So just San Francisco, we're seeing about 800, 850 unduplicated clients.
And is there a fee for service?
No, so a lot of the money we receive is from, it's complicated. We receive state money, we receive some federal money, and they don't allow us to bill Medicaid. They don't allow, it's considered to be double billing. Yes, over there.
So I have kind of a two-part question. So, I'm hearing with the model some of the restrictions for against longer term or previous victimization. Do you partner with other existing agencies for someone who might need longer term healing beyond those 16 weeks? And what do referrals look like? And I guess that segues into a more general about how opening a TRC affects existing providers that are doing similar work in the area.
Yes, I think that's a great question. So the two-part question, the first part of it was, do we partner with other groups that we'd be able to refer to? So and the answer to that is yes. If we're seeing someone, and let's say we've seen them 32 sessions, and they have additional needs, oftentimes that person is not needing it around the index crime that got them into treatment. Maybe it turns out that they're now dealing with a history of childhood abuse, so really more long issues that might require, we're not going to be able to really put a dent in. We do have partners that we're able to refer them to. I think, again, San Francisco is is different from New Jersey in that San Francisco, our clients, we have access to Medicaid, but also a lot of people may not be eligible for Medicaid, but we have Healthy San Francisco, so literally every medically indigent person in San Francisco is covered with health insurance. So recognizing we're able to leverage additional resources than some other communities are able to. I will tell you, when we first started out, and this is the other issue, so I think in the beginning there were other people in the community that were not liking the idea that we were opening a TRC, and I think there was some fear that we were going to take funding away from them, and so people were feeling very territorial. And the reality of it is no one's funding was cut. This was a new pot of money, number one. Number two, there are so many, we're not able to serve all of the victims in San Francisco. It's wonderful that we have partners. And so at this point, and it's taken a long time, I mean, I didn't say this, but we opened the doors of TRC back in 2001. So over time, we really have formed really wonderful, powerful relationships with our partners. We have partners in the substance abuse world and residential care world and all of that. And it takes time to develop that, but in the end, it really is about leveraging all of a city's resources, finding common ground and saying we're all doing it on behalf of the clients. We have to figure out a way of working around this. Oh, how about you?
So the 16 sessions that you do, are any of them conducted in group? And are they conducted weekly?
Yeah.
What's the sequence?
That's a great question. For the 16 sessions, are they conducted in group or weekly? So let me tell you a little bit how it works. So we get a referral, and we actually talk to the person on the phone, explain what's going to be happening, explain what services we have provided, and then if they're willing, and a lot of the times, even though we will do services in the home, most of the time they do come to us. So and I won't go into all of the other engagement that happens before we even see the person, but the person makes it to us. We then do an intake, and we have a standardized way of doing it, which I'm happy to share with you all. A lot of it is in the manual. We do this intake, and the purpose of the intake is to really get a snapshot of what issues the person is contending with right now. And we also tell them, we offer mental health services, we offer case management, and then after we see the client, we also do some baseline measures that I mentioned to you to get a sense of the severity of the problems the person is contending with. We also say, when you think about your life in a given month, do you have enough money to pay for medications, to pay for rent? So we also do a needs assessment around their financial needs and the kinds of things they might have, what the case management needs are. The center is divided into 2 intake teams, and every single new case is presented before a team, and the team then, decides who's going to continue to see the case. The client then is given, and most of the time people get both case management and mental health services. Everyone who wants mental health services gets individual treatment, but we also have available additional groups. So everyone gets individual treatment, but we do have additional groups. We have a group for drug-facilitated sexual assaults. We have a seeking safety. We have a lot of different groups that we offer as an enhancement. Not everyone likes groups, so we're not going to put people in a group if they're not liking it. So that's kind of how it works. And then we've already mentioned what there's a lot of bias around the use of psychiatrists. But I will tell you, there are certain people, and our psychiatrist doesn't work like a lot of psychiatrists. I mean, again, think about this is a team approach. And we see a lot, I would say about a third of the people we see, we can't touch their symptoms of insomnia. We can't get therapy's not helping them with their insomnia. It's not helping them with their nightmares. And there are some other physiological symptoms that we're not able to quite touch. And so our psychiatrist really helps with that. Our psychiatrist teaches a class on how to get a good night's sleep. So again, the main thing here is don't think traditional mental health. Let's throw that out. And what I mean by that is we're not, we do look at people's symptoms like traditional mental health, but we're trying to approach people with a different lens. Yes? Yeah.
You said in your, the mental health services that you provide, you said you work to make positive meaning of the trauma, and then you also have below that community debriefings. Can you say more about
Yes.
what are those?
Yes. They're not related at all. So if you think about, we talk about the stages. Oh, I'm sorry. So yeah, the question is, on one of the slides, there was something about making meaning of trauma, and then there was a question about community briefing. Are they connected? Are they 2 different things? The making meaning thing, let me say one more thing about that. The kind of framework that we work with is a framework developed years ago by Judith Herman, and it's the stages of recovery. The first stage of recovery is safety and stabilization. That's really the most important thing. We need to keep people safe. We need to try to stabilize whatever overwhelming things are going on in their lives. So that's the first stage of treatment. The second stage of treatment is referred to as remembering and mourning. And that's the stage where people begin really processing what happened to them. And, what we know about traumatic memories, unlike any other memory around, we know physiologically, scientifically, traumatic memories are laid down in the brain in a different part of the brain than regular memories. And that's why they kind of take on a life of their own. in an unbidden way, they're kind of having intrusive thoughts and all of that. So part of the hallmark of dealing with trauma may be trying to help the person relive that traumatic memory. And it's never that people are going to forget it, but having it maybe strip away some of the power that that memory has on people. And then the third stage is really around kind of reconnecting with the community and reconnecting and finding meaning from the trauma. And not everyone wants to get to that third place, so that's a little bit different. The community debriefing, what I mean by that is, someone went into a hotel, an SOO hotel in downtown San Francisco, and just randomly shot people. So we were able to go to the hotel and deal with the people working in the hotel and did a debriefing with them, talked to them about what happened, did some psychoeducation with it, so that type of thing. But two separate things. Oh, and how about you?
Hi, Leslie Reynolds. I'm the program director for the Hispanic Family Center. I heard you talk a little bit about some of immigrant-specific services. Can you talk a little bit more about the work you do with the immigrant population?
Yes. The question is, can I talk a little bit more about the work we're doing with immigrant population? So this is another thing we have really struggled with because in California, with the state money we were receiving, we could only see survivors of trauma who were victimized in the United States. And here we were seeing many victims who were victimized in Guatemala or victimized coming over the border, and yet our funding would not allow us to see that group of people. And so we were able to eventually, we're now designated a National Center for the Treatment of Political Torture. So we actually have a whole branch of what we do that's dealing with people seeking asylum and also refugee and immigrant groups. And so it's a mixed group. We have some people who've been in San Francisco and were victimized in San Francisco as a refugee or an immigrant. And then we are seeing people who were victims of political torture in their homelands that we're seeing. And we've been able to meld it together so that it's all really one program. We just have funding to serve that group. And we see people who speak 45 different languages. And so it's really a challenge finding staff who can speak all of those different languages. We're very, very lucky, though, because we have a relationship with the refugee clinic at San Francisco General, and we're able to hire what we call cultural navigators. And these are people who speak those different languages who not only serve as interpreters, but they help teach us as clinicians about the culture that we're working with. And the cultural navigator sits in the therapy room with us, and we really work as a team. We debrief before we see the client, we debrief after we see the client, and we also provide additional things to our refugee immigrant population, computer literacy classes. We try to link them up. We also do asylum evaluations for people seeking asylum. We have a group of physicians who volunteer their time who do forensic evidence collection to take photographs of physical injuries. And we also do psychological asylum evals. And our record, so mostly, if somebody's seeking asylum and you have to go through a whole court process, it's usually about 30% of people who go before a judge have their get approved for asylum. With this package thing that we do, we've had like about a 90% success rate with the evaluations we're doing to get people asylum. Okay, over there. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about the staffing, the organizational structure, what that looks like, and where are TRCs typically housed?
That's a good question. So the organizational structure of a TRC and where are TRCs housed. So in San Francisco, the organizational structure is we have a director. At this point, it's a psychologist. We have a kind of a clinical coordinator who looks at flow throughout the clinic. We have about, at this point, about 8 social workers, 3 psychologists, a psychiatrist, and then we have a database manager because we produce a lot of data. Separately from that, because we run the city's rape treatment center, we have a bunch of nurse practitioners who are the ones that collect forensic evidence on all sexual assault cases. So it's not a huge staff. I will say, this is something I haven't mentioned. And by the way, we're located 10 blocks away from San Francisco General, and it's a safe distance for a number of reasons. A lot of people that we find, a lot of the survivors are not wanting to go back to the hospital, it has bad memories for them, but we're close enough that we're able to go and do sweeps at the hospital looking for survivors of crime, but we are located in a pretty central location in San Francisco that's readily accessible by public transportation. I should mention a lot of the other TRCs across the country, most of them are located in the community itself. There's a few that might be located at hospitals. I will also tell you something else when I say we provide case management and therapy. There are 3 different ways. The way we do it in San Francisco, which seems a little bit, I think a lot of people are surprised by it. Whoever is doing the case management also does the mental health services. So we are using the same social worker to do both the therapy and the case management, or the same psychologist doing case management and the therapy. And we do that because it's really a way of not having people fall through the cracks. And when I talk to my staff about it, they end up saying interesting things about that. That number one, it takes a while for us to see the effects that therapy has in changing things. But when somebody walks through the door and you're able to give them a food voucher or do something practical, it does 2 things. Number one, it makes the clinician feel like they're doing something concrete. Secondly, it's a way of building trust so that that person's more likely to engage in treatment. That's how we do it. The 2 Illinois TRCs are doing it a little bit differently. They are doing, they have a clinician that does the therapy and a clinician that does the case management, but they work extremely closely to make sure that everyone's on the same page with it. And I think if you're going to split the functions up, you just really need to make sure there's lots of communication. I will tell you the model that does not work well, and we have seen it, and I can tell you empirically what does not work well, and there's been a few TRCs who started out this way and they've changed. It's when they have a case manager located at the TRC and they subcontract out for mental health services to happen elsewhere. That's usual care. That's not going to work because people aren't going to show up for treatment and there's no coordination of care. And then, oh yes, please.
I'm from the Center for Great Expectations in Central Jersey, and most of
That's a great name.
Huh?
That's a great name.
It's a great agency. And we kind of try to provide a continuum of care. So our clients mainly are mandated. They are all what is CPS or here DCP and P involved. And then especially our male clients that are in our outpatient are all of these things. However, we do trauma work, so we treat them. They are most of, if I can't even think of one person now, that has not been a victim of a violent crime. But mostly it's been cumulative or complex trauma and family, community, state-based if they've been incarcerated trauma. And so one of the things that I would love to be able to provide, and I'm wondering how you guys do this, is real coordination and access to legal, like I love the legal services idea, but also to help work with, say, the parole officer. We have a really great relationship actually with parole and ISP, drug court, to get them to be more as partners or maybe as advocates, NCP or DCP and P. Because I think often it's like we're trying to bridge two opposing systems, and that can feel really difficult. And I'm wondering how you liaison with that, or the attorney general or prosecutors.
So the question is a program that works with people who are mandated into treatment. I take it they're on parole or probation. And then how might this model work, and how would you be able to use it to liaison with agencies like parole or CPS and things like that? We're not doing that, but I actually see that it works well. It would be a win-win in the sense that, number one, I do feel this model works in motivating people who might not seem motivated to get into treatment or to maybe open themselves up. I know they're mandated for treatment, but I do think that that would work. And, you know, what I've been surprised by is, you know, there's a lot of different people we have to interface with, and as long as you can figure out what the common ground is.
Well, right, but how does the agency, like, so how would they, with the state of New Jersey or Georgia, California, Illinois, whoever, offering kind of a liaison service, right? So if these states have said, you know, hey, we're going to support, you know, these models, are they, you know, how do they act as kind of, I'm thinking maybe like more restorative justice, kind of, you know, how do they act with the clients who are receiving the services to support the service and support the clients? You know, by offering, I don't know, coordination or even discussion. So like if you're in drug court, you go talk to the judge, or whether the judge knows who you are, they know, oh yeah, his wife left him, and you know, that's really sad, and he's had a relapse, we're not gonna say, you know, that they kind of, you know, or the ideas that they attempt to do that. Do these states have any relationship with the law enforcement aspect so that they can build up more as a resource and a support, rather than perhaps if they are more in a punitive way or a monitoring way, like a CPS, who's like, you know, monitoring the client so that they don't lose their kids, or, you know, making sure that they're together.
I mean, I think what you're talking about is a great idea. I think the different TRCs kind of do it on individual client level, not on the system level you're talking about, which I think is a great idea. And I don't know, E, if you have any thoughts about that? Yeah. 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 Oh, yes, over there.
How does your team work together? So how frequently do they meet? What is the best way for them to communicate to best provide services? And secondly, how do you support your team? How do you take care of them?
Yeah. So two questions. How does the team meet? And then how do we support staff? So the team meets in a lot of different ways. Let me address how we support staff. So I really believe we have actually moved away from the term self-care to the term collective care, because we basically feel that to encourage staff to do vicarious trauma work, it really needs to come from the top. It can't just be, oh, you guys go take care of yourselves. So we do a few things. We have a 1 hour of protected time every week, which is a collective care time. And staff don't have to work during that time, and they usually, it's voluntary. They get together and they do a few things. Sometimes every other week they want to just kind of talk about the effects of the work and how to cope. And other times they do something random. You know, we have a chocolate factory next door, so they may go and get some chocolate. And it sounds hokey, but it really is a way of recognizing that when vicarious trauma is real, it needs to be acknowledged. And we have had people come in and do meditation with staff, relaxation. So we do that. We begin, so there's an hour every week. Every staff member is given an hour a week of supervision, and it's more to the point of obviously making sure clients are taken care of, but it's also to support the staff, to give them that kind of buffer. The third thing is at every staff meeting, we begin every staff meeting with a client success, and this is our way of reminding us it's not just about the horror and the tragedy in our people's lives, that people do get better. And it's really amazing because the success stories we have, I know keep me going for a while. And then at the end of each meeting, we do a staff acknowledgement where people will just take a few minutes saying, the other day I was running around crazy trying to do this, and this, and so came and helped me with it. So simple kind of acknowledgements, and it's that conscious way of reminding staff that the world is good, is filled with good people. We have since, this kind of gets a little hokey, but we have, remember I told you we have all of these partners out in the world that are doing wonderful things for our clients. And twice a month, we sit around during staff meeting as we're all discussing things, but we'll send around a thank you card where we want to acknowledge someone in the community that did something nice for our clients. And so it's really a way of expressing gratitude, and it's a way of reinforcing that people do good things for us. In terms of the structure of, in terms of the team approach, so the team approach will be if a psychiatrist is working with the clinician on a case, they get together, in an ad hoc way, usually to talk about the case. We talk about at the intake team level, we talk about cases. The supervisor, the clinician talk about it. And if there's ever a case that people are really stymied by, we'll have a case conference on it. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm with a domestic sexual
Yes.
violence organization in Sussex County. Our staffing, I'm just wondering about the case management piece. We do have clinicians on staff, as well as other staff. I'm wondering with the case management piece, would that necessarily have to be a clinician? Because we do have case management, and it can be labor intensive sometimes. So that was one question I had. Would you see anything wrong with using non-clinicians in that role?
So the question is, can you use a case manager who is not a clinician? No, I don't. I think the main thing is that the clinician and the case manager needs to talk, really needs to coordinate things. And, I got an interesting phone call from one of the TRCs from Ohio last week, and they were having some staff issues directly around that. They have a case manager, then they have a mental health person. And they're supposed to be talking to each other, but the mental health person was basically saying, this is HIPAA information, I can't share it with anyone. And my feeling is, we tell clients ahead of time, we work as a team here. If you talk to the mental health person will be sharing information with the case manager on a need-to-know basis, and that we do work as a team. So this mental health person was caught up with, well, they're not a mental health person, I can't talk about it. So number one, you need to make sure the mental health people understand this case manager is a critical part of the team. But the other part can also happen where the case manager may not really, again, because of the stigma of mental health treatment, may not want to talk to the mental health person about it. So, we have all of these strange kind of splits that we have. As long as you running the team, people know that we're working as a team to the best interest of the client and that we're coordinating things. And if that case manager is going to be taking this client across town to do something, then the mental health person needs to know about it. Or if the mental health person feels that an important thing would be, I don't think you should take the bus with this person quite yet because they're going to have a panic attack. So let's work together on how we're going to be able to get you to take the bus with them, that type of thing. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I'm just wondering about that because I know that we often have people come to us and say, wow, I think all these symptoms are from the childhood sexual abuse. So there's a realization, although the crime, victimization might have happened, or even a memory that it has happened.
That's a good question. So what about the client who, 30 years ago was a victim of very severe chronic childhood abuse? Are we not going to see them? Again, for us, You could. My feeling for us is that in San Francisco, we decided that we felt we could be the most help with people who've had a recent victimization, and also because we never would be able to have the capacity to treat people who were victims of childhood abuse. Even though it is such an important area to treat, we just would never have the staffing for that. And that feels lousy saying it, but being realistic about it, we don't. Some TRCs might do that. And I will tell you, even though we say we have this, you have to be a victim of a violent crime within the last 3 years, we try to use some judgment about it. Somebody calls me up and says, my son was murdered 4 years ago. I mean, we make exceptions to it, so it's not like it's a hard and fast rule. But yeah, what you're talking about, I mean, I do think this model, and you're right, I mean, we know that childhood abuse has all kinds of bad outcomes associated with it, all kinds of adverse outcomes associated with it that may actually be the key to why someone is failing in their lives. And that's not quite what we're able to do. And yes?
So a question both for us, but also for folks at OAG who might be receiving some point applications and making determinations. As TRCs are being established across the country in various states, what's being done to ensure that the folks that are actually being tasked with creating and founding one of these centers actually has the trauma expertise, the social justice expertise, that they can navigate with somebody who's experienced sexual trauma, but also the survivor of homicide. We who work in these fields recognize those traumas are different, and that the needs of folks coming in are different, and also that they have the mental health capacity. Those of us in the working with folks who have been victims of crime, I've seen are not always adept at navigating addiction or navigating mental health needs. So how are we finding the folks who are actually uniquely positioned to bring together all these different needs? What criteria are in place for the hiring and retention? So what funding levels are there to actually bring in folks who are seasoned professionals, not just programming based on interns and volunteers? And then again, if Kelly or E or anyone else are looking over a grant application, what criteria should they be using to make sure this is the right organization, right program, right set of professionals to actually be implementing this?
What, talk about what's happened in other states?
Yeah. I think that's a good question. So, how can we ensure that those TRCs that are funded really have the organizational capacity to actually do it? And it's this is the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, the reality of it is that there's not enough people in the country that really are trained to work with victims of violent crime using a culturally relevant framework or with a framework of social justice. And the various states have done it differently. For example, I've been very impressed with the state of Illinois and how they rolled it out. First of all, they have built in the infrastructure so that the 2 TRCs in Illinois are given, they write into their budget money for training and money to train staff on evidence-based practices. And so the staff get actually sent to training on like the STARE approach or narrative exposure therapy. I have been went to Illinois, on a number of occasions to meet with the TRCs to help them write protocols and policies. In the beginning, weekly phone calls, providing technical assistance to the 2 TRCs, that sort of thing. So building in technical assistance. If you don't build that in, you're right, it's not the fault of agencies that they don't yet have that capacity. We need to build it. If we're talking about transforming systems of care, we need to put the infrastructure into it. We need to train people how to do it. It's not rocket science. I mean, I think it does get into the issue of how each agency, how do you hire people? How do you figure out, that this person has, because part of it is, it's not just the form of doing it and your little checklist that I'm doing this, this, and this, do you have the right mindset around trying to do away with health disparities? Do you have the right mindset around social justice and inequality? You know, those are the people that are going to do well in this model. So part of it has to do with the agency themselves and how you hire people. If it's a wonderful social worker and they just haven't had a chance to learn evidence-based treatment, then there are ways to train them up. One of the things we're trying to do with the National Alliance of TRCs is that we're looking for, we've just submitted a grant that would, if funded, would bring all of the TRCs together across the country, not everyone, but 3 people from each of the 25 TRCs, and if New Jersey joins them, to an annual conference where we would do a lot of work around sharing best practices and also doing technical assistance around evidence-based practices. The one thing I would love to see happen is, and I don't know how to do it yet, but there are people like the Stockton TRC is just doing really amazing work, and they work with a largely indigenous community, and they do a healing drum circle, which the clients really benefit from. Anecdotally, people are resonating with it, and yet that is not, quote, evidence-based, right? So we need to be able to figure out in the communities we serve how to test out the innovative interventions communities are using that are not yet been tested to be evidence-based. So I would love to be able to come up with a way for all of us to think about that and make sure that the practices we're using, and there's a lot of good stuff that's going out there, but, quote, they're not evidence-based. So that's another thing we're thinking of. Yes?
I just wanted to elaborate on that just quickly. Thanks for that question. As I think you know, I come from a background of working with crime survivors who have experienced a lot of harm from service providers, right? Things like DV survivors being shamed for not leaving, gunshot survivors who've been questioned about, well, why were you in front of that liquor store? So causing additional harm to survivors is one of the things that I'm deeply concerned about and really looking at in this role. And I think that TTA is a lot of our answer, and also doing cooperative agreements with our grantees to make sure that they're connected to us and to a TTA provider, the grantees, so that we're all working together to ensure that we maintain standards that don't re-victimize survivors. So that's something that I'm looking at and working on. So I really appreciate the question, and definitely spoke to one of my great passions.
Just to piggyback on that, there's victim witness advocates that are located in prosecutor's office.
Yes.
How would they transition?
Oh, I think they would still have their victim witness advocates in other places where they have TRCs, so they would have to do work collaboratively.
Yeah, actually, one of the greatest sources of
Not be put out of business.
Yeah, one of the greatest sources of referrals we get is from our local victim service office. And that's one of the things where we will work with them if we know they're working with a client. It's like we work together on it. Yeah.
Actually, I hear from the victim witness advocates that referrals to clinical services is one of their greatest challenges, right? So that's why we're trying to figure out how we meet the needs of all of our systems.
Oh, let's see. Yes, I was.
Hi, so I have 2 questions. Well, 2-pronged question. The first question is about case management, and then the second is about development of TRC. So the case management question is there a specific model that the TRC uses for case management?
Yes. There's a specific model we use for case management. There's all different kinds of case management. One is brokerage case management, which is essentially giving the person information about how to get services. So, you want food? Here's an application, go to the GA office, whatever. So that's kind of brokerage case management. We use one that's really developed actually for ACT, assertive community treatment, and we actually really developed for you. And it's really on the assertive kind of outreach approaches that we're using, so that it is it's clinically informed, it's meeting the person where they are, it's making sure, so it's pretty much, it's an adaptation of that. Yeah.
So the second piece is the development of the TRC
Yes.
itself. For like existing expansion sites, how do they put together their application? And then the second piece of it is how do they assemble their team? And what other funding sources that from the state or local government can they get?
That's a great question. So it sounds like it's a question around applying for funding and how people put their teams together and financial sustainability. So most states, the way it's been working in the states I've worked with, the state puts together a notice of funding. It tells you what you need to do to apply for the funding. They put together a team of grant reviewers. The grant reviewers, review it. And then in the states that I think are doing a good job of it, they then announce who's going to receive the grant. And then for a lot of the states, then I would get involved in working with the programs early on. So in addition to the manual that's online, we have information like job descriptions. So we have like forms that we use in San Francisco that can be adapted for your purposes. It's not going to be the same thing, but we have, with a job description for the psychiatrist or a job description for the social worker. We have that. We have, Illinois also did it in an interesting way. They said to TRCs, we want you not to hire staff for 3 months. We want you to begin a planning process, and during that 3 months, we want you to spell out what your protocol is going to be. Who are your referrals going to come from? How are you going to get them? So, that makes sense, right? And you don't want to just because the problem with the state funding is, okay, we're funding you November, you're getting the funding, we're notifying you October 1st, you're getting the funding, and you need to begin working November 1st. So people are really scrambling to get that done. There's a planning period where you really think through your protocols, you think through the flow of clients, and you have 3 months to do that, then you're able to open the doors to kind of maybe a soft opening. So those are the kinds of things that with technical assistance, I think, and a little bit of hand-holding, you're able to do. I want to be really clear. New Jersey, and that's a question I have for all of you, do you think this kind of thing would work in New Jersey? And if not, what would need to be adapted? How would you need to adapt it? What are your thoughts about this? Yes.
I have a question about applicants who are applying for grant funding. Who are you finding are you finding that municipalities are applying for funding? Are you finding more collaborative nonprofit
Yes.
clinic applicants are
Yes.
applying? In other states,
Yeah. Yes. And I realize I left out the second part of the question, which was sustainability. So, I think that is really the trick, that you need to really diversify in terms of your funding. And the one thing is, this model is building partnerships, making sure that everyone in local government and state government knows what a great job you're doing. And so right now the funding in San Francisco is we receive state funding from the Victim Compensation Program. We started out with that. We were then able to go to San Francisco government on behalf of our clients who were there, basically saying, these are citizens of San Francisco who are getting, killed on the streets of San Francisco, raped on the streets. We have a model that works. We want some money, so then we got city money. When we realized that there were asylees and refugees that we were not able to see with our city money and our state money, we got federal money from the Office of Refugee Resettlement. We do fundraising. So there's a lot of different aspects to it, and kind of grows on itself. And then you had a question around,
So when you're receiving applications
Oh.
for funding,
where is it coming from?
so, right, are municipalities, nonprofits?
So each state usually says, and I don't know how it would be with New Jersey, but each state pretty much says, you must be a nonprofit, and it could be a community-based community-based agencies. It could be hospital-based. There are some TRCs that are based at level 1 trauma hospitals. There are some that are based, we have a TRC, one of the TRCs in Los Angeles, the Downtown Women's Center, who has focused with a rape crisis center named Peace Over Violence, and they have partnered up and they've become a trauma recovery center. So it really is quite different. It's really up to the state to determine who's eligible, but it's a little bit like what doesn't work. You need to, when you're applying for it, though, be able to show that you've had some experience working with survivors. Yes.
So can I just answer like a question that you posed to the group? Yes, please. Maybe if you're working in the group. I think you can. So I work in North, and I live in North as well. But what happens is that we have funds, and it gets allocated to organizations, and sometimes we have about 6 organizations in the city that do the same work, and then we're all the model can do is really consolidate the services that we do. We have good communication across the board and say, hey, we want to create a TRC here, and we're going to take your services from this institution, and centralize it so that we're having a greater impact, because we're fighting over money, or we're fighting over who provides what services, but the clients are missing out on a lot of sustainable services. So I think this model will be beneficial to like a city like that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. I'm sorry.
I would love, I would love to, I'm in North Jersey, we're very rural. Transportation, transportation, non-existent. Mental health services, 3-month waiting list, community mental health centers. So we were really making a
Yes.
push to go
Yes. Yes.
that would work.
Yes.
As far as crime, we're low crime level.
Yeah.
I would say most of our violent crimes are in the area of sexual
Right. And domestic violence and child abuse.
So, I mean, I'm just loving the model.
Yes.
And I'd love to just adapt it within the agency itself.
That's great. Thank
A
you.
lot of needs.
Yes.
And also to answer that question, I think absolutely we work in New Jersey. We can do it better. So I do think, and I want to get your thoughts on this idea of multidisciplinary steering committee or advisory board to help to guide the implementation of this, because not all of us in this room should be doing this. We just don't. We're not within an organization that's structured to do this, or we don't have the clinical expertise, whatever that is. But we all have insights that could possibly help inform this process as it rolls out, and to provide oversight once things get established to make sure practice is actually evolved. And then, because we're Jersey and we're aspirational, some think it's installed, this idea of using the Trauma Recovery Center to start to create trauma recovery communities, so that that trauma expertise is not just housed
Right.
within trauma,
Right.
but that the survivor who has the option of 3 or 4 different similar service providers can choose any one of them and actually be met with opportunities to heal instead of being harmed by
Yes.
somebody well-informed or well-intended who doesn't actually have the expertise to do that. And that way, as we're making, because one thing that kept striking me is that we're making referrals to other ancillary services, whether that's law enforcement, whether that's medical, whether that's mental health or substance use disorder services. But we haven't done the foundational work to deconstruct some of the oppressive systems in there, and address all the issues that are in place there. Folks are going to be harmed. And I think that a trauma recovery center that is serving to actually work anti-oppression work throughout the community can help and build the trauma capacity of all service providers. Everyone from, we did a listening session recently that focused on how many folks are reporting incidences of trauma and crime victimization to their hairdresser. If that person had some basic trauma skills, like, again, there's communities that support people in healing, that destigmatize the idea of seeking help and prioritize your own healing versus taking care of the needs of your family members, all of that could help to improve outcomes universally without folks having to find their way through the doorway of the center. The center could be a great locus through which all this change work takes place. But I do think some multidisciplinary input would help. state level working group that is a lot of people that look like. We need to have community feedback that will make sure that these initiatives are actually being inclusive and accessible. That makes sense. So
No, that
would
sounds-
that make sense to have something at that level, and something that actually comes with some funding to participate, so we're not exploiting the expertise and experiences of folks that are contributing.
No, that's a great idea. Yeah. Yes,
Yeah, so
I'm sorry.
I've been thinking about this for a while. I work here in Trenton, I'm the director for Health and Human Services. And I actually just attended a conference a couple of weeks ago in Pasco, Washington, that the work that they have been doing has grown out of the work that Dr. Nadine
Oh,
Burke
yes,
has
yes, yes.
done on
Uh-huh.
that basis.
Yes.
And so, my theory is that our entire community here in Trenton is traumatized. And I base that on the reality that, you know, we've had massive numbers of shootings, you know, scattered around the community, in groups, like, been gunned down in a car at 4 a.m., you know, I don't know, it was mistaken identity, I don't know what the issue was. But the issue is that, as far as I can tell, the entire community is traumatized. So I've been thinking about how can we, and many of the organizations, institutions in the city have been looking at and implementing some form of trauma-informed
Mm-hmm.
But my concern is that, number one, the care is not standardized. Like, you know, they say we're doing trauma-informed care, but then I get a report like, oh, yeah, so a young woman went to, you know, this facility the other day, and during the intake, the person taking the information says to her, oh, well, if you do get a diagnosis of ABC, then very likely, you know, you're not going to be able to do anything for you. Thank God somebody was with her when that diagnosis was given. But that's my point. I mean, there seems to be no standard procedure for delivering trauma-informed care. That's number one. Number two, you know, we are all looking at the social determinants of health. And so I'm looking at, okay, so and I'm not health is not my background. I kind of got this position serendipitously. My background is development, though. Economic development, small business development, organization development, that's my master's. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, so we've got all of these approaches to working with the issues that we're addressing, but where is the amelioration? Where is the healing? Where is the ability to reverse the impact of trauma and really complex stress? And so I'm thinking, medical, dental, emotional, behavioral health care into the schools. If we do that, we're going to have to end up working with the parents, hopefully. But then, what happens to the people who are beyond school? So, the young pregnant mothers, we've got programs, for example, you know, that are operating around the city. So, I'm looking at your model and thinking, can we provide, instead of one center in the city, kind of a trauma network where one group of service providers are delivering one element of those 16 sessions. Another group of providers is providing another element of those 16 sessions. Have you seen or do you know of small, I mean, we're small. We're a small community. We're 1/10 the size of San Francisco, a third of New York. Literally, I mean, they're 24 square miles, we're 7. So I'm just looking at how can we do this kind of at a community level?
Yeah,
I mean, I think
yeah.
we're small enough that we can do that.
You know, that is really an excellent question, and I think, I think the one limitation of the Trauma Recovery Center model is that we're not going deep enough and we're not penetrating enough the whole, the roots of violence in the communities we have. We're not there yet. I think we can do a pretty good job of changing, to some extent, some systems of care. I can tell you one of the things the San Francisco Department of Public Health is doing, and the Department of Public Health is what oversees, all of the hospitals and rehab units and primary care clinics and all of the mental health agencies in the city. It's a pretty big department, and anyone who would have access to any of those different things, physical health or mental health, and to some extent in the school district, the Department of Public Health, and there's a few other cities in the country, received money from SAMHSA, and they got a lot of money, and what they are doing is they are systematically mandating that anyone who works for the Department of Public Health, and there are thousands of people that work for the Department of Public Health, are mandated to go to a 4-hour training on trauma-informed care that also includes training on implicit bias and all of that. So it doesn't matter if you are a janitor, you're going to go to that training. If you are a phlebotomist, you're going to go to that training. And, no one likes to go to mandated trainings, right? No one likes it. No one likes to being force-fed this. But it has been done so skillfully and so respectfully, and the training has been done in a trauma-informed way. And trauma-informed way is basically saying, this is a safe place, this is a transparent place, every voice gets heard. And so they have been doing that for about the last 2 or 3 years. And now I don't have any data that shows that it's had an impact, but you have to start somewhere. The other place that I think we need to start, which I think is what Prop 47 was wanting to do in California, was to put money into the schools to train teachers around trauma-informed teaching, to train teachers around identifying children that are being exposed, which most of the kids in a lot of communities are being exposed to it, and to do some education around that. And then also, how do you talk to parents around all of that? So it's not what you're suggesting, I think, is really a wonderful idea. It's really around, can we think about this in a bigger way? I don't quite know how it would work doing pieces of the TRC at different locations. I guess it could work as long as everyone is really, it's all about coordination, right? So if you have 5 of these different networks, as long as everyone is really communicating and talking about it, would make sense. And then, yes.
Oh, I just have one thing. I just wanted to touch on this briefly, that in Newark, where I've been doing my work for many years, we made trauma-informed practices part of our public safety strategy, right? And we made it actually the foundation of our public safety strategy. So that meant that we started doing the community police trauma trainings, right? So we could learn. It meant that NCST that's sitting over there got a Seton over there to provide clinical services in the community. And at the Asia Smith over here started the Shani Baraka Center and connected, so we started infusing, and NCST does high risk intervention. So we started infusing trauma-informed practices in all of our public safety work as well, because it's at the heart of public safety, right, is wellness and reducing trauma. And then the Department of Health declared that was when we had Dr. Hamdi, and she said that, we were going to treat violence as a public health issue, and that we were going to have, that all systems were going to be trauma-informed. very slow and painful and a lot of work to go. Like, I'm not trying to be Pollyanna up here, but it helped to have the police department and the health department and all the public safety agencies. And I'm sorry, there's so many other folks like Newark Community Solutions in the back that we've all been part of this trauma-informed, building a trauma-informed community. But the thing that was amazing was to see you go to a meeting and have law enforcement and folks who are actively involved in street violence knowing language about trauma and recognizing their trauma symptoms, and like starting, like Rob was saying, to build a community of trauma-informed folks and a community of healing. So anyway, love to talk to you about that some other time.
Over there, I keep ignoring that side of the room. 1 and 2.
What is your budget for the year, your yearly budget?
Oh, my yearly budget? Let's see, from the, it's about 2 million at this point. But that also includes the nurse practitioners and things like that. If you're talking about the mental health team, it's about,
Just trying to figure out how much.
it's about 1 point,
Cost, sorry,
about 1.5. Yeah. Yes, please, I'm sorry.
I was hoping to answer your question about how it would work in New Jersey. So,
Yes, please.
So I do like this model, and I like the focus on stabilization and short-term skill building and things like that. So I also work in Newark, and we work doing clinical mental health services for survivors of trauma, but we take a long-term strategy. And so I like this model, and I like a lot of what it brings, but I guess my concern would be, you know, in looking at it in terms of like a funding opportunity for the state, is that we would have to acknowledge some of the gaps that exist, especially thinking about lack of longer-term access to mental health care in terms of like universal health
Right.
care here in New Jersey. And just kind of an acknowledgement that, like, you know, it's not that one place can ever be anything, so this place will probably not be everything for everyone, but for the folks who wouldn't meet the criteria, like a lot of our survivors
Right.
have experienced complex trauma over their life
Right.
cycle, so a lot of them wouldn't necessarily meet here. And I just worry, you know, to your point earlier about the folks that hurt the most get the
Yes.
least help.
Right, yes.
Just acknowledging that in New Jersey, this would be like a critical first step in care, but starting to think about, I guess my concern would be that, you know, with a broader reach or opening the door to complex trauma, that there would be more folks coming forward that are in need of those advanced services, that then we wouldn't have anything to provide for
Yes.
them.
And I think that's really a good point. So what do we do for people who need more advanced services? I mean, one of the things that, one of the evidence-based treatments we're doing is a treatment called STARE, which stands for skills, training, affect, interpersonal relationships, something like that. And it is really designed for people with complex trauma. And it is designed for poly-victimization. And I will tell you, it's a 16-week model. It really works. It really works in terms of stabilizing people and all of that. The reality of it is a lot of the people across, not just trauma, across mental health, could use services, can almost use a case manager for life kind of thing. And I don't know how to get there. And it's one of the things I really struggle with all the time. I struggle all the time with, I have a certain number of treatment slots, and it's never enough. And even with a shorter-term model, we're still having people, you know, waiting to come on in. So I think what you're saying is this isn't going to solve everything by any means. It's just the beginning. And I really do believe that, you know, again, this has never been about the TRC model. It's just been, can we use it as a vehicle to change other things, though? Can we use it as a vehicle to change other things? Yes, Akila.
Yes, I just wanted to just speak to that piece as well and say that one of the things that we're proposing in Newark is a coordinated victim services strategy so that multiple agencies work together, because we know about long-term as well as short-term. We need all of those pieces. In addition to those alternative technologies.
Right.
Because so many folks, especially black and brown folks, have been victimized by the medical establishment.
Right.
And people are literally afraid to go into hospitals to deal with therapists in any of those particular types of things.
Right.
So there's a long way
Right.
that people have to go to even feel comfortable of walking through those doors. I know that with many of the therapeutic services that we support, you know, either through CEMU or through NCS or, you know, some of our other partners, we literally start thinking that DCFS is coming, to seize your children, all types of different things, because it's complex, right? So it's important that we have all of these pieces.
Yes.
So the more the merrier.
Right.
So we need TRCs, HBIPs, we need everything.
Yes.
The thing is that we need to have these services coordinated through a trauma-informed lens, and I think that that's what we're hoping to try to achieve. And he said it's a kind of like Pollyanny, but the reality of it is that it's very difficult and challenging work, but it's happening. It's happening, and we already have seen the effects of it in the city, just in terms of how it's affecting public safety, because the more services that we can provide to victims and help them to heal from trauma, we reduce violence and crime in the city. We prevent victims from becoming perpetrators, and we begin to change the narrative in the system around who victims are, because we know that just the language and the terminology in itself, victims, has a negative connotation in communities of color. So we like to utilize the term survivor because it speaks to a person that's had an experience that they are engaged in their respective healing journey, and conceivably they don't want this to happen to someone. So we're trying to change the narrative. We're expanding the definition around victimization and survivorship, so that we can actually open more doors and create more points of entry for people to actually enter, to be able to get services.
And to your point, sir, I agree that, we stay away from clinical language, and I think at the agency that we work at, which sees substance abuse as an adaptation of trauma, and we try to make it very, homey, like they're gonna be safe when they walk in the door. They don't, they're gonna feel comfortable and they can take their time. And so we will have people for a longer length of time because they can take their time to develop the relationship. But one of the things that I find it hard, especially with a I'm thinking of a substance abuse piece now. I'm also thinking of a reentry type of a piece, is that there's a lack of social networks. So if you have a lot of gang involvement, right, or military, so military people, they have a social network. Gang involvement or have a social network, substance users have a social network, right? And that if we're only bringing people around where they can only identify with the negative things that have happened in their life and have a positive social network, and so it's like hard to try to find other positive things where they can connect with people, not just about negative things, but in a social capacity, and in a community capacity. And I think it is really incumbent and, on the community to provide avenues for connection, social connection, fellowship connection, spirit, whatever kind of connection is available that's not just centered on clinical trauma, violence, incarceration. What we're talking about brings me to the concept of developing a trauma recovery community collaborative within each of our centers. And as you've been providing the information about the model, I kept getting hung up on the needs of specific victim populations or survivor populations. For instance, needs of domestic violence victims are very different from those of sexual assault victims and gang violence victims, homicide victims, and so forth. And in our communities, we have organizations that specialize in serving these specific populations. So what I'm wondering if we can integrate the trauma recovery model within organizations that are currently existing and linking them to a collaborative to ensure a standard of care.
Yeah, I think certainly that could be applied to a specific population, and I think some of the TRCs are doing that. Again, the one issue I have with it kind of makes you think that poly-victimization doesn't happen. At least most of the people that I see, it's not just that they've been sexually assaulted, it's everything else that has happened to them. So I think we kind of create these false silos. I think it's a training issue, though, when you're trying to train a staff to deal with the different special needs of those groups, but I think you can do that. I think there is a way, you know, for somebody working with domestic violence needs to understand the restraining order process, which maybe you don't need for some other categories. And for sexual assault, they need to understand some of the issues around, you know, particularly around drug-facilitated sexual assault. But those are more knowledge-based kind of things. A lot of the skills that we're talking about should, if you're doing it, a lot of the skills that you're talking about should be able to go across all the different groups. The skill area about how do you engage people, how do you deal with mental health stigma, all of that is pretty much should be applied to any victim group. But I guess if there's a particular, you know, a very, the way California did it was there were some rape treatment centers that were applying for the money to become a TRC, and they were basically told, if you want this money, this is earmarked for treating all victims of violent crime. So you can continue to see rape victims. We just want you to see additional victims as well. And I think the reason for that, and I don't mean to, so the way VOCA the money has been used traditionally, and if you go back many years, it has always been used to treat sexual assaults, domestic violence, and child abuse. And that is all really wonderful, but it really has been to the exclusion often of people of community violence and shootings and things like that. So there's been entire groups of crime victims that have never, ever been served by VOCA funds. I don't know why that is, but it's one of the things that I think some of the states are trying to correct. They're really trying to focus on other kinds of underserved communities. And it's not to take money away from rape or domestic violence, it's just acknowledging that really there have been crime victims that have not been able to sit at the table to get access to those funds.
I agree with what you're saying about especially the mental health
Mm-hmm.
workers being able to intervene with across victims of crime in the different types. What's different with specific populations are the other systems involved in. For instance, a legal department will be very dealing with victims of domestic violence will have a very targeted scope of
Yes.
services, career development, job job search. These are services that may not be well aligned with other victims. So it's not just the mental health and the clinical case management, it's the other systems that can be integrated, that can be more specific from one type of victim versus another.
Yeah, I could see that, and I think it's a challenge for the clinician to navigate all of those systems, but I think they're able to do that. Yes?
Are the services that you provide in San Francisco 24/7?
It's a good question. The services we provide 24/7, no, they're not. We have one piece of it, the rape treatment piece, just because of how the funding works, that we're available 24/7, but not for the rest of it. Yeah. Yes?
Could you discuss, I guess, the similarities or differences between the trauma recovery center model versus a hospital-based violence intervention program?
Yes, thank you for asking that. The differences between Trauma Recovery Center and hospital-based violence program, and we have one at San Francisco General, and we work actually closely with them, and we actually have one of our social workers embedded with that. The one at San Francisco General it's a fantastic program, and they don't provide mental health services, though. They provide great case management and peer counseling, but they don't provide mental health services. And so that, I think, is one of the big differences. Some of the, if people are not familiar with the hospital-based intervention programs, they're usually affiliated with a Level 1 trauma center, work very closely with trauma surgery, and they have a great team of people who, similar to TRC, interface with people while they're in the hospital, identify them while they're in the hospital or been discharged from the hospital. Does a lot of work, particularly for people between the ages of 14 and 25, although some of those programs are now expanding and seeing an older age group, and they're really doing a great job around interfacing with issues around community violence, gang violence, and shooting. They do a lot of work with the gang task force in the police department. They do a lot of work with gangs themselves. They do a lot of violence interruption work. They do all of that, and that's a piece that the TRC is not doing, and it's an incredibly important piece. And they help people do, the overlap is around some of the case management kinds of things, but they do some pieces that TRC does, and we do some things, namely the mental health piece, that they don't do. And we now have embedded a social worker within that team to be able to provide the mental health services to, in San Francisco General, that group is called the Wraparound Group. I personally think that the TRC model and that model really should be wedded more, and I think we could do a better job by our clients if we were to do that.
No more questions?
Oh, what? Yes, please.
Do you find that the model has worked differently, or has it occurred differently if it's not in an urban area like San Francisco? I mean, the agency that I work for is, we're in Burlington County, New Jersey, so we've got Philadelphia over there, and we've got Trenton over here, and Newark over here, and New York over there. And do you find that do these centers exist at this point and not close to that urban center?
I think that's a great question, which is something I think you were alluding to, too. Can this model work in more rural areas rather than urban areas? And I think it can. I've been talking to the state of Michigan around the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is very, very extremely rural. And so some of it has to do with who's already providing services in that community, and can you train up those people if they don't do trauma work, can you train them to do it? But what if there are no mental health? We have parts of, the Upper Peninsula in Michigan where there is like no mental health person. So some of the things that we're thinking of is, first of all, a lot of primary care clinics sometimes are having mental health people embedded in rural areas. They can't have an entire mental health agency, but they may have like a mental health person embedded in the primary care clinic. Is that a place to deliver some of these services? But the other piece is telemedicine and telepsychiatry. And when you look at outcomes, I always had this bias, like how can you do therapy, over Zoom, over Skype. And yet when you look at the results of it, it is incredibly highly effective. And in some ways, it kind of makes sense. If you're avoidant and you don't want to leave your house or whatever, or you even have some trust issue, there's something about not being in the same room with someone you're delivering the services with that sometimes makes people feel safe. So telemedicine would be one way of doing it, but then having it be, let's say there was going to be a TRC in Trenton, and there's like a big TRC there, and you're in a rural area, having that Trenton TRC help kind of link up to offer some support to the staff in your community, something like that. But you had another question.
I guess I'm thinking somewhere in between, like the places that are just solidly suburban. They're not the rural.
I see.
They're not the urban. There are services and service providers. I was just wondering, is there a TRC currently like in a suburban area?
I'm thinking of the 25 that are around. Not really. Well, it's 9:15 my time. I don't know. Yeah, you had a question.
As far as the clinical services, is the evidence-based practice, is that standard across TRCs, or does that really vary by each center or each mental health clinician?
I think that's a really good question. Does the evidence-based practices, is it the same across all TRCs? Right now, so what the National Alliance of TRCs is going to do, and we just recently formed a few months ago, we really are going to, as a national association, begin coming up with standards across all of the TRCs. Right now, in evidence-based practice, National Institute of Justice has a list of what's considered to be evidence-based practices for the treatment of victims of violent crime, and SAMHSA also, and the way something becomes evidence-based, you have a group that goes and really looks at the research that's associated with a particular practice, and there's all kinds of criteria whether or not that gets stamped as an evidence-based practice. So the evidence-based practices that are used is coming from one of those credentialing bodies. But for example, we might use something called STARE in San Francisco that has not yet, because it was developed in California, and it may not have quite reached Illinois yet, but Illinois may use cognitive behavioral therapy that another center's not using. The goal would be, though, to eventually have standards and to provide training around all of these different evidence-based practices. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry?
In the event that, New Jersey was to come around and create funding for this program, now, who would pretty much take the lead in the application process? I know you have the National Alliance of TRCs now. How much help would this person receive from the National Alliance, or is it solely on them to come up with the, grant proposal, trying to meet the criteria?
I think the question is how much help would someone receive? I think if New Jersey were to put out a NOFA, I think they would, you'd be kind of on your own at that stage. Although I'm always happy to answer questions. I wouldn't be, you have the TRC manual is online. I could, help answer questions about it. But until you are funded, once you're funded, the way it's worked in other states would be there would probably be a convening of the new TRCs with, I have a technical assistance team. We would meet with all the New Jersey TRCs at once. We would kind of talk about how to implement it. There would probably be 2 or 3 visits like that. And then from that point, there would probably in the beginning be either weekly or every other week joint calls. So let's say there are 3 or 4 TRCs, there would be joint calls with us around technical assistance. And I want to really stress, when I talk about technical assistance, I'm also meaning how you all can help each other. It's not just, I do not have all of the answers. I really don't. This isn't about, this is really creating a learning collaborative. And I will tell you, when we've done this in other states, the TRCs starting out at the same time in that state become buddies to each other. They're also talking offline around the obstacles that are happening and all of that. So, but in other states, weekly phone calls or maybe twice a month phone calls, and then ad hoc questions to me and my team around things that problems you're running into. So that would be the type of thing. And we're kind of still new at providing this technical assistance, so we're still growing and learning as we go along. Does that answer your question? Okay. New Jersey strong.
All right. After flying overnight, this woman has stood on her feet for 3 hours. So thank you, Dr. B. Dr. B was saying about the success stories that keep her going, but and those absolutely keep us going, but also it's being part of a community of people who are doing amazing work and dedicating their lives to helping survivors every day. So I just want to thank all of you, and please recognize each other and the wonderful work that y'all are doing. And thank you for coming on a Friday morning in the summer to hear about this model and have this conversation. And y'all asked questions for over an hour. So that tells me that you were really interested, and I feel like that was a success. So,
Just one point, are you going to share our information with all of us so that we can?
I would not do that because privacy concerns. I don't feel comfortable sharing everybody's information, but maybe we could figure out a way to have an information exchange with. I got to figure that out internally. I'm new to the office, so I don't know what the rules are, but I'm fairly certain I'm not allowed to exchange everybody's email addresses. But we'll send out an email blast to everybody with the link to the model you can give me feedback. Also, the live stream will be recorded if you want to share it with other folks. And then maybe in that, we'll figure out a way to continue the conversation if we do, come together as a collaborative. But I just want to really thank you all for coming, and thank Dr. B for giving us all this time and coming. So thank you. And one last thing, just don't leave us with any food, okay? So clear out the food, take your food for your offices. If there's anything left, we have the room until 1 o'clock, so if you want to chat with your colleagues, you're welcome to stick around, but we're going to shut the live feed down, and we have to give Dr. B a rest. So thank you so much. Be safe.